Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I saw a post by someone who I've had the real pleasure of interviewing before on a couple different topics, that she was a keynote speaker with a couple thousand people at the big Elevate conference last week, and she spoke about trust. Trust. And she suggested that trust was in challenge today and that there are some things we can do about it. And so I thought it would be really interesting to get Dr. Chitra Anand on the show and talk a little bit about the trust trifecta. Dr. Anand, what is the trust trifecta?
Thank you, and good morning, Brian. The trust trifecta is an inspiration really spawning from the post-pandemic, but sort of leading up to the pandemic. And the pandemic really revealed that we've got a trust crisis from a leadership perspective, from a civilian perspective, from a societal perspective. You know, if you look at what's happened during the pandemic and post-pandemic, and even the state of the world right now, we've got, mass information. People are losing faith and trust in leadership and political leadership. And when that happens, you've got organizations and societal institutions that could collapse as a result. And so my whole thesis around that, Brian, is that, if trust is really something that is critical to us as a society, how do we start to set up the foundations of trust? And so my hypothesis is that we've got three dimensions of trust: humanity, reciprocity, and practice. And so if we can establish those in that order, we can have better economic and social outcomes.
Humanity, reciprocity, and what was the third?
Practice.
Humanity, reciprocity, and practice. That's interesting. And now tell me a little bit about the speech. I understand you did it with a harpist on stage?
I did. I had this idea. I mean, there's lots of keynotes out there, and I'm very passionate about taking a multidisciplinary approach. And what I mean by that is, infusing different concepts, right? And so I wanted to bring in a musical component, because I feel that if you want people to really remember and to have an emotive reaction, that having something that's a bit more from a cultural perspective really can have an impact. So I collaborated with this incredible electronic harpist. Her name is Marie-Michelle Beausoleil. She's based out of Montreal. I've heard her play a couple of times, and she's absolutely mesmerizing. So she actually narrated the talk via her harp, with my I wouldn't even call it a keynote. It was an immersive experience. Yeah, I wouldn't call it a keynote.
Fantastic. And this was at what conference? The Elevate conference?
This was at the Elevate conference, which took place just this week in downtown Toronto, in which several thousand people came from around the world. They had different installations in terms of keynotes, workshops, different topics. I was quite actually impressed with the diversity of topics, the diversity of people there, everything from, social issues, business issues. So it was quite an interesting range of diverse topics. Yeah.
But it's primarily technology, is it not?
Correct. It's an innovation technology conference. Correct. So I would say the majority of, sorry, go ahead.
So why, for an innovation technology conference,
yeah,
did the people want a conversation about trust?
Well, if you think about it, Brian, trust is at the cornerstone of any organization. And it's actually a core theme from my research, my doctoral research, is that if you don't have trust, people won't have the courage or the boldness to innovate. If you don't have trust amongst your peers and your colleagues, you won't be able to have safe places to experiment, which is a form of innovation. If you don't have trust with your leadership, you won't have the environment where innovation and the organization can flourish. I mean, it's a building block and a cornerstone of how organizations, companies thrive and will thrive. And if you don't have that, I mean, it can be extremely detrimental to the sustainability of your company.
And you're saying that you think trust declined dramatically because of the pandemic. Why? Because we didn't trust Fauci, the head of the National Health Institute in the United States, or because we trusted people online that were telling us about vaccines or about COVID or about other things? Like it seems to me that we still had trust, but it fragmented, and we trusted different voices.
Well, it's an interesting point. I won't say that it was a result of the pandemic. My position on that is that we've had a trust crisis for several years. But what the pandemic did, as it did on many different issues, is it really shed light on the criticality of this topic. And exactly to what you just said, I mean, we were in the middle of a mass pandemic. We didn't know what information was accurate, where to go for accurate information. There was many different ways that information was being distilled to civilians. You had a whole workforce that had to go and shift now to hybrid, or to be working from home. That in itself is huge, because you have to have trust. You have to have trust of your employees. You have to have trust of your organization. So what it did is it shed light on an issue that is critical for us to really sustain ourselves as a society, but also, from a workplace perspective as well.
There's a fascinating thesis that you have about trust and this trust crisis. It'll be interesting to understand a little bit more about how you actually want to solve it. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in 2 minutes with Dr. Chitra Anand talking about trust and a speech that she made last week to the Elevate conference, a couple thousand people with an electronic harpist on stage called the Trust Trifecta. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. You can trust us on that. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is talking about trust, the trust trifecta. My guest is Dr. Chitra Anand. She is an award-winning communications and marketing executive. She's got over 20 years in technology industries. She was head of communications at Microsoft Canada, director of marketing at Telesys Corporation, and director of operations at OpenText. Projects she guided at Microsoft and Telus have been awarded IABC Gold Quill Awards, Canadian Public Relations Society Awards of Excellence, the Corporate IT Hero Award by the Information Technology Association of Canada, and the Business for the Arts Awards. She is at the forefront of an important new movement in the workplace, intrapreneurship. Entrepreneurs are the people within your organization who possess an entrepreneurial spirit, driving innovation, creative thinking, and new ideas. She's a doctoral research in innovation and culture change keynote speaker, professor, and writer. She's been named as a bridge builder for women in tech by the A-List, a yearly publication that features 50 prominent Indo-Canadians. And we have the pleasure of chatting with her tonight. Dr. Chitra Anand, I read a really influential book, maybe half a decade ago, by Francis Fukuyama called Trust. So trust is something that people have thought about for a long time. Yeah. Why have you got a new and different take on it?
I mean, that's an interesting point. Yeah, we have thought about it for a long time, but, my take on it is, although we've thought about it for a long time, we don't seem to have made movement in terms of a deeper understanding of how a solid foundation of trust can be formed. And I believe, in my humble opinion, that as we look at, building the innovation tech ecosystem, whether be it in Canada, North America, or at a global level, and as we build institutions and organizations, really understanding trust at the grassroots level will help us set a more solid foundation. So everybody can have their own interpretations of how you do that. But I mean, if you look at what's happening right now, people can't get people back to the workforce. Why? I mean, it's a core component of trust. Like, if you go downtown Toronto, and as you can see, there's vacant buildings and no one's downtown. I mean, and I do believe that it's a flawed system in terms of how we build cultures of trust. And so, my whole take on that, Brian, is we have to go back to grassroots. We almost have to go back. I mean, there's almost a, the reason why we say there's so much knowledge and wisdom and history And so, that's sort of my perspective on it, that we've lost that. And the question becomes, why have we lost that? Is it technology? Well, technology has done wonderful things for us. It also produces a bit of a crisis, so how do we solve for that together? And that's really the ethos of that.
Okay, so let's take that one example, just to dissect it if we could. Why are people not going back to the work place? They're enjoying hybrid work. You're saying that there's a lack of trust, and that they don't trust their work environments to be healthy, and that people around them aren't going to have COVID, and so therefore they want to stay home so that they don't get sick. I would have actually, until you mentioned that issue, I would have thought the opposite, that there's people that don't want to go back to work because they're just enjoying being at home and they think they should be trusted to work. And there's this tussle between CEOs that don't trust that people are working and being productive when they're at home. So therefore they want them sort of under their sight at the workplace, so they can't be off doing whatever personal thing they might be doing, versus the employee that says, no, I'm trustworthy, I can be productive, I can do work, and I can be more productive at home because I don't have to spend an hour driving to wherever.
I don't believe the issue is that companies, I don't believe that the root of why people are not going back to work is because, and there's a trust between the employer-employee. People are at home for different reasons. But I think that what's happening is that people are not going back to the work environment because there's something broken within the organization. And when I talk about cultures of trust, it hits many dimensions. You want to go in, it has to be a very natural, organic process. I want to go in to see my employees, my colleagues. I want to build, I want to collaborate. I enjoy my work. I enjoy my leaders. I think there's a deeper problem. When you have a culture of trust, you want to go to work, you want to see your employees, you want to collaborate, you want to be social, but something's happened that has broken down this sort of synergistic relationship between the employee and the employer. It's not that people are staying home for various different reasons, but I think it's not just one dimension. I think there's many different factors that play here. And I think that it is this issue of trust. And if you really love what you're doing, and if you trust organizations where you work and where you're thriving, you do want to go back into the workplace, because I do believe that there's a deeper rooted problem there.
Okay, well, that's fascinating. So if I'm a leader of a company, how do I create more trust? Is it through the trust trifecta? How do I actually create more trust?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's many different things that we have to look at. We have to look at the work that you're doing, your career trajectory, your work environment. How are people behaving with one another? A lot of people don't want to go to the office because of cultural issues. Then it's not enjoyable. It's not, you shouldn't have to be extracting people to go back. It should be this very natural. We are human beings. We're prone to, we want to work. Work makes us progress forward. It's not healthy to stay idle. It's not healthy to stay isolated. And so if there's something that's missing there, then that's a problem. So leaders need to sort of take flight and say, what's happening from a work perspective, an environmental perspective, that people don't want to come back? How do we build an environment that's conducive to ensuring that people are flourishing, ensuring that their careers are moving forward, ensuring that we're giving them what they need, so that it's a symbiotic relationship? And I think those are the conversations, and that's the type of thinking that needs to happen from an organizational level and from a leadership perspective.
I think you've got a great positioning on that issue. I think that too many people, too many employers, too many CEOs are saying you have to come back, and you have to come back because I'm mandating it. And what you're saying is that's the completely wrong approach. It should be creating an environment where people want to come back.
You can't mandate people to do things. It's just, you can't. You can, but you'll have implications as a result. People should want to go back on their own. So the question, and here's the thing, Brian, from a leadership perspective, if you look at the C-suites and the very senior leaders, they need to ask themselves, what's missing, rather than mandating. There's something wrong with how we've set things up. How do we make it more, I wouldn't say enticing, but how do we make it so that people naturally and organically want to come back? Because it's very human at a very, very, very raw level for us to progress forward. Work does that for us. And so that's a natural process. So there's something broken between the two.
Well, I think this current UAW strike has got aspects of that. If you've heard some of the reports, it was that, here we, from a government and a human, from an employee standpoint, we bailed out the car companies during the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009, 2010, and helped these car companies to survive the Great Recession. And now the bosses are giving themselves, massive bonuses. And they're making, with inflation and supply demand challenges, outrageous profits, and the employees are saying, "How come you're not sharing with us?" And so there's this lack of trust that the bosses took the benefits from the government and the employees when they were desperate, but then when the good times came back, they didn't share.
So don't you think that's wrong? At a very basic level. And the fact of the matter is, we see that time and time again. There's a huge divide in terms of compensation, in terms of how people are compensated. But if we're much more transparent with what we're doing and why we're doing it, that starts to build trust. So that's a huge component to it. And so people are getting extremely turned off. They're getting extremely deterred from wanting to go back because they start to see these discrepancies in the workplace, and it's a massive deterrent for them wanting to go back. I mean, that's, it's visible time and time and time again.
Okay, so let's come back to your trifecta.
Yes.
What specifically does your trifecta tell people to do to reestablish trust?
Well, my trifecta has 3 dimensions, as I said earlier: humanity, reciprocity, and practice. And when I talk about humanity, I am saying that in order for us to really build trust, people need to have a better relationship with themselves, because the relationships that they have with themselves projects the levels of trust you then project into other relationships.
Whoa,
So
hold it. So you're saying if you don't trust yourself, other people aren't going to trust you?
What I'm saying is that if you don't trust yourself, that lack of trust is then projected into other relationships. If I don't trust myself, I'm not going to trust other people. So it's foundational, and it begins with ourselves. So when we trust ourselves, when we know ourselves, when we're able to have a better sense of values, morals, cultural beliefs that define who we are, which is very difficult to do, because what I'm asking you to do is work on yourself, as any leader or person should be doing. That will then set the foundation of how we then project trust into other people. So all of that is foundational, and it begins with ourselves.
Chitra, if I could call you Chitra, work on yourself, know yourself. People bandy this around all the time. How the heck do you actually do it? How do you know yourself? How do you analyze your own self? How do you do the deep work?
No, I mean, and it's a very good question, right? One of the things that I talk about is this deeper self-reflection. Like, we don't, we go through life, Brian, be it careers, jobs, that are successful and not successful, right? We've had good experiences and bad experiences. We are a product of our own experiences and constructs. What we don't do as human beings is stop and reflect. Okay, so what did we just go, but we don't take the time to say, okay, I had that experience. What did I learn from it? Like, that's deeper learning, right? Like, you're a learned person as well. Like, what did I learn from that? Okay, well, how do I take that learning and then extract the golden nuggets from it and then go to my next thing? How do I then, positive or negative, have that deep reflection? We don't do that. We don't stop and do the critical thinking of what makes us who we are. And we talk, sorry, go ahead.
Life gets busy, and
it does.
And we've got jobs, we've got kids, we've got lawns to cut, we've got bills to pay. What are you saying, that we should all go on a 2-week retreat in a monastery and meditate? No. Just think about what's going on?
No, it needs to be this constant, well, what did you learn from that experience? It's a reflective process. I mean, we started to do it in, my time even at TELUS and Microsoft. If we went through and it's very basic, but take the time to do it. We're moving so fast. We did a project, we did a program. What worked? What didn't work? How can we be better? And what I'm saying, if you don't do that as a leader, then it's going to deter you from setting the foundational moving forward. I kind of gave this example of my father. My father is an immigrant. He was born in India, and he was diagnosed with polio at the age of 2. So he couldn't walk or stand. And there was no vaccine at the time. So he had to, he had all these limitations that were put on him. Like the doctor said, he would never walk, he would never have children, he would never be able to live a full life. And he completely defied all of those assumptions. He learned how to ride a bike with one leg paralyzed. He taught himself how to swim with only his arms, and it goes on. And he's walking today without a crutch at the age of 84. And so my point is that if we don't do the work on ourselves, like people will constantly put limitations on you, if we don't do the work, and so my point is, if it's trying to trust your body and challenging some notions, and if you don't do that work foundationally, then that will set the foundation of a poor trust foundation, which then we project onto other people. So it really is an looking inward process. And as executives, I think it's critical that we do that, because every career position, every experience teaches us something positive or negative, and we need to extract that in order to be better moving forward.
And so is that the humanity part of the trifecta?
Yes.
Fantastic. This is going to be interesting to hear the rest of it. But what we're also going to do is we're going to have Dr. Chitra Anand tell us, recite for us some of her actual speech that she made to Elevate, though I don't think we're going to have the electronic harp, which is too bad. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in 2 minutes with Dr. Chitra Anand talking about trust, the trust trifecta. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight, we're talking about trust with Dr. Chitra Anand, who is a keynote speaker, or at least was a keynote speaker last week to the Elevate conference, and with an electronic harpist, talked about the trust trifecta. And I thought it would be interesting if we could actually hear some of that speech.
Over to me?
Yes.
Certainly. Okay. So trust is a firm belief in the character, strength, truth, and commitments of someone or something. Trust is the social glue that holds all kinds of relationships together. It is the most essential ingredient and foundational principle that binds us together. Social trust is the confidence that other people will be doing what they should be doing. And it begins with an assumption and common understanding that we are interdependent and that our interactions are linked. It then continues with an assumption and common understanding that we share the same moral values. Research shows that in high trust societies, corruption is low and entrepreneurship is catalyzed. High trust nations have lower economic inequality because people feel connected to one another. It is a direct measure of the moral quality of a society or organization. When people lose faith of a church, the church collapses. When people lose faith in leadership, the company or organization collapses. And similarly, when people lose faith in institutions and in each other, a nation could collapse. Trust touches every area of business. The Harvard Business Review identifies the following. Workers at companies where trust is high report a 106% of greater energy in the office, 74% of lower stress levels, 76% of greater engagement, and 50% of more productivity. According to the Edelman Trust Barometer, we have an epidemic of misinformation and a widespread of mistrust of societal institutions and leaders around the world, and this divide is widening.
Okay, so again, I guess What do you do about it? Because, as you're talking, I sort of think that you can't create trust. Trust has to be the result of other stuff that you do. And so I guess my question is, what is all the other stuff you got to do to get trust? And you're saying the first one is humanity. And
Yes.
talked about how you've got to do the deep work and understand yourself and trust yourself so that you can trust others. You said the second one was reciprocity. What's reciprocity?
So reciprocity is a principle that is based on social psychology, and it says that we pay back what we receive from others.
Okay, so what do you do?
So really, it's how a culture of trust is developed. So it's when we have skin in the game. So it's really about this reciprocal relationship. So whatever I'm invested in you as much as you're invested in me. And so my hypothesis around this concept of reciprocity is that's lacking in the workplace. And I give an example of the Grameen Bank. Are you familiar with the Grameen Bank?
Yes.
Okay, right. So you know the Grameen Bank, and perhaps our listeners are not, but Grameen Bank is a bank in Bangladesh. And so what they do essentially is they give out microloans to the impoverished, and they don't require collateral. But what they do is they've completely turned the banking system upside down, and their entire model is based on mutual trust, accountability, and participation. And they have an incredible high rate of returns in terms of how the loans are paid back, because it's rooted in the idea of a morally binding group contract, so that if you default on a loan, it impacts everybody. And so the concept here is that when we have more accountability in each other, that drives a higher degree of trust. When we have more skin in the game, when I know that my actions are going to impact you, Brian Crombie, I tend to take more attention to that. And that's the idea of reciprocity, which we need to bring into the workplace, that we are intertwined. It's interesting when you think about how teams are built. And it's interesting because I've just taken on coaching 12 11-year-old competitive basketball players. And my philosophy on this team is that we're not building one star. We're building a team. And that team is going to be cohesive, and it's going to mean that your success is my success and my success is your success.
Well, a few points, if I could. So number one, yes. I understood that the Grameen Bank, what they did is they created these sort of groups of people that they would lend the money to, and so therefore the money was lent, and the people had to talk, and they would assist, and they would provide counsel, and they would provide help, and all that stuff, and the team had to repay the money, and so therefore there was a huge amount of peer pressure in that reciprocity, and so it was not only that it was that other people in your team, in your grouping, and this lending grouping would be negatively impacted if you pay. And so therefore it wasn't just your relationship with the bank, but it was a relationship with the other borrowers in your team.
Exactly. And so you said something. I wouldn't call it peer pressure. I would call it accountability. Like, if you're going to default on a loan, it's going to impact everybody in your cohort. That's a big deal. So if I know that my actions and my behaviors are going to impact other people, we will tend to take more attention. Like, that's just human behavior. So when you start to create these pods of people that know that their success is going to be a collective success, that's what drives greater trust.
Okay. On your basketball team, I'm not sure if you're a fan of Ted Lasso at all, this show on Apple TV, but have you seen Ted Lasso at all?
I have not.
So there's this great scene where he's talking to Jamie, the star footballer, and he says, you are the best player I've ever coached. There's just no question about it. You're the best player I've ever coached. You're 1 in a million, and you're 1 in a million. But the problem you've got is you only think you're 1 in a million. You don't realize that you're also 1 of 11 until and unless you come to the realization that you're one of 11, you're never going to be as successful as you could otherwise be.
Well, exactly. And here's the thing, Brian. you said something earlier, like it's things that we've talked about in the past. We know these things, but we're not learning as a society. And that's
Well,
where
but talk about the past. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Like that was
sure,
written 2,000 years ago. Isn't that
right.
reciprocity?
Well, yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when we look at sort of the progression of society, the levels of trust have gone down, community has gone down, organizations are struggling around these cultures of trust and cultures of fear and toxic workplaces and failure in leadership. And we tend to put leaders who, if you look at what happened with Uber and WeWork, with these, Elizabeth Holmes, we put these people on pedestals who, who are driving corrupt businesses. So, why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? And so it's, if whether it's going back to basics, okay, maybe, sure, so that's really what we need to think about as leaders, as people, as human beings who are trying to create and reset the workplace. As you were talking about the basketball example, do you remember the example of the NBA All-Star team who went to the Olympics, and you had all the goats, but they lost to Sweden? So they lost to Sweden. You had all the goats, but they lost to Sweden. Why? Because they weren't playing as a team, right? So you can have all-star players on your team, but if you're focused on me, I, which we are, we're in a world of it's all about me and it's not about us together, the togetherness, then we won't be successful. Like you can have B players, and if they work together, they're going to be better than your all-star team if they don't work together.
Well, I always thought it was important. I've quoted this when I was a coach of hockey, that Wayne Gretzky got the most goals, but he also got the most assists.
So I just was corrected. They lost to Spain, not Sweden. My 9-year-old just corrected me.
That's helpful. And the nice thing about that is you trusted her. And so
yes, absolutely.
The last one is practice.
Yes.
What is practice is all about?
Okay. So, we talk about, you said, so how we know all this and how do we already know this? The whole idea is that we need to turn it into repetitive behavior, like trust as a practice. And so how do we start to do this? And how do we turn it into a process? And it's all around, we struggle with, and that we see all of these, broken processes or brokenness in the workforce, and we see bad behavior, but we're too scared to vocalize truth. And we're also, whether this is a North American phenomenon, we're too afraid to be truthful in workplaces and in society at large. We always sugarcoat things, or we just sort of walk away from behaviors that are, not ethically or morally correct. And the question becomes why. And so what I'm suggesting is that we need to start practicing being transparent. Like you have this salary discrepancy between CEOs and people actually doing the work. Like, why is that happening? Start questioning, why are we doing the things that we're doing? Like, let's have a conversation about that. Like, that's just not okay. You see, the inequality of women and the pay gap. Why are we, like, what is actually happening? We can't seem to have a truthful, transparent conversation around it. And so what I'm saying is, and it's interesting, if you go to, part of my research, I go into different cultures of the world. And if you go to the Dutch culture, they have this idea of speakability. And like what that essentially means is that everything's on the table. Like there's nothing that you shouldn't be able to talk about in the workplace. And it should be up for debate. But what we've done is we've created this culture of fear where we can't have these honest conversations with each other because people are afraid of the implications. What if I say this? What if I do that? What if I disagree with this? Like we've lost our whole concept of debate. Like I can disagree with you, Brian, respectfully, as you can with me. It doesn't mean I don't like you or appreciate you or respect you. It means I actually respect you. Let's hash it out, because that's the power of diversity of thought. But we've become so weak as a society to say that if I disagree with you, Brian, it means that I'm being difficult or that whatever, right? So we're
Is it
starting
because
to
I apologize for interrupting. Is it because our
no.
social discourse is becoming more personal, less issue oriented? When I take a look at
Yeah.
the the debates in question period, or
Yes.
the Republican debate that occurred last week,
Yes.
the animosity, the personal attacks, when they were talking about issues, they could have just kept the issues to issues, and then they started talking about carpets and curtains. I was going like, why are we talking about carpets and curtains during a national debate?
Exactly. We tend to start to personalize things, but exactly to your point, like stick to the issue, stick to what it is that you're to, um, what is the outcome, right? I talk about, even in my book, I talk about this power of debate and the power of dissent. If you're in a boardroom and everybody is agreeing, there's something wrong. Like people, we need to have healthy debates where people can voice the truth of what it is that they're saying. So we need to start doing that. And why, we have so much to learn from different parts of the world, right? Like, and so part of that is like, question is, have you become too weak of a society to say that I disagree with you, that, or I'm just going to be nice to you and then I say something else to someone else? No, I want you to tell me what you think, because I can handle it. I can handle it. And I appreciate that, because that's how we built trust. Tell me your direct feedback or your direct insight, and let's you and I have a conversation rather than it come from different sources. And we've started to perpetuate that. And that, as much as we say like that's a buzzword, transparency, but okay, well, what does that actually mean? How do we actually break that down in a way that we can have these healthy debates and truthful debates, work through them to achieve what it is we're trying to achieve?
I got to tell you a story about that.
Yes.
Last week, I ended up meeting by chance, actually, the former CEO of a major real estate development company, a gentleman that's probably worth a couple $100 million. And he asked me, and we were talking about this radio show that I do, and he asked me who was the best interview, and I said the most interesting, not the best, and I said the most interesting was Jim Pattison. And he said, well, what did Jim Pattison say or do that was so impactful? And I said, well, so many of the people I've worked with will sit at the head of the table and
Yeah.
will speak first. And Jimmy Pattison always made the rest of the table speak before he would speak. And because of
Yeah.
that, you got the benefit of everyone else's different, diverse, and sometimes, challenging points of view. But when you're the leader, even though you've got the right to make the decision, if you speak first, everyone else is going to shut up because they don't want to
Yes.
disagree with you. And he said,
Exactly.
Brian, that is, I think, one of the biggest skills of leadership. And you should make sure that people hear that. Don't speak first if you're the leader. Let other people speak and solicit and want to hear their points of view.
100%. We want to hear, and I want to know the truth. I don't want people to agree with me for the sake of agreeing with me. I want to know truth. I want people to, I mean, that's how we get better. Challenge me. That's okay. We can handle this, right? That's what challenges our brain, our thinking, our ideas. That's what progress is like. So we need to be set up this foundation where we start to practice it. Like, how do we actually turn this into a practice? How do we start behaving in a way where we're saying that it's okay to do all these things, and we have to start having those conversations?
Passing conversation tonight with Dr. Chitra Anand, who has made a big speech about the trust trifecta. And she says that we need three things: humanity, reciprocity, and practice to achieve trust. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A really interesting conversation tonight with Dr. Chitra Anand about trust and how she thinks that we're in a trust crisis in our country and in our businesses. Maybe we could think about it in personal lives as well. I'm not sure. And she has suggested that the solution is the trust trifecta. And she made a speech to a big conference, Elevate Conference, downtown Toronto, with a couple thousand people, with an electronic harpist on stage at the same time, where she talked about the trust trifecta, which is humanity, reciprocity, and practice. Dr. Anand, I told you earlier that I'm in the midst of doing my own doctorate in business administration, my DBA. And my topic, interesting enough, is social capital.
Mm.
And my thesis is that social capital is the glue that keeps societies together. And I made the argument that trust is like profit. And let me see if I can explain this to you and see if you agree or disagree. I made the argument that if companies focused on profit, that was their objective, that they wouldn't actually achieve profit. But if they worked on things like high quality products, good customer service, positive employee relations, reasonable expense structures, the result would be profit. So if you focused on profit, you actually, worried about short-term earnings, and you cut expenses, and you did some of the bad things that the companies do, and you don't actually achieve long-term sustainable profit. But if you focus on those other things, then you actually often received profit. And I made the argument that trust is the same thing, that if you focused on trust, you were focusing on forcing it. But if you focused on social capital, good long-term interpersonal relations, and constructive working relations, then trust would be the result. So that trust is a result, not the thing that you're working on. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does. So you're saying trust is a byproduct of social capital. I think that, I wouldn't disagree completely with it, but when you look back, and part of my research is when I study all of the case studies that I have in different parts of the world, different cultural phenomenons, if you go back even to hunter and gatherer societies, trust is what binds human together. Role, responsibility, who's accountable for what, etc. And what binds that together is trust. It's the glue amongst those interactions. So I would argue back and say it's the glue. I wouldn't disagree that the social capital is necessary, but what intertwines and what solidifies all of these different components together? It's trust. If you don't have trust that you're going to do your part, even if we go to hunters and gatherers, you do the hunting, you do this, you do that, then the system breaks down. It's the system that breaks down. And so if you don't have a solid foundation of trust, then the system is at risk. And that's really the ethos of what we need to, what I believe is the crisis here is, if we don't have trust, then the system is breaking down. And we've seen that, like in any institution, be it organizations or companies or Fortune 500 companies or even startups, if you don't have this mutual trust with each other, then the system will break down. And how do you create a solid system? Because I would say that everything else is a direct output of the system. And if you don't have a solid system and foundation with trust as the glue of the different components, then everything else is at risk.
Dr. Chitra Anand, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about the trust trifecta. Can people buy a book about it? Can they see your speech somewhere? How can we delve into this issue more?
So the book is coming out. I was just simply a chapter from my book. But if you'd love to learn more, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or directly via email. And they can check out my website, which is chitraanand.com.
Thank you so much for joining us and telling us about the trust trifecta. And I want to hear the electronic harp along with it at some point in time. That would be a lot of fun. That's our show for tonight, everybody. You can trust that I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. And I actually post all my my videos on social media, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, on Facebook and Instagram. And the podcasts are on like SoundCloud, Speakeasy, Audible, Apple, etc. So, I'm lots of different places. And I'm not sure whether that's trustworthy, but you can certainly go out and find me. And Dr. Chitra Anand, thank you so much again for joining us and telling us about the importance of trust.
Thank you, Brian. Always a pleasure. Thank you.